Hello, and welcome to I Am Not For Everyone, the podcast for those looking to release shame, heal from trauma, and feel really, really good being their fully expressed, authentic selves. My name's Dr. Lee, and I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and a certified clinical trauma professional, as well as a mom, wife, and a human being navigating the world with complex PTSD. Season 1 of this podcast came about because I was tired of spending decades living in a shame-filled, trauma-laden body and brain. And after doing a lot of work and learning how to return to a safe, grounded place in my life, I knew it was time for me to take my experience in education and use my voice to unsilence myself, to release the leftover shame, and to give others permission to do the same. On season 2 of this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my experience in education. But even more importantly, I'm going to be bringing on some incredible guests who are going to unsilence themselves. They're going to share their own stories of trauma, shame, and their journeys to healing, resiliency, and self-acceptance. While I believe these episodes will be deeply impactful, I do want to add a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering topics. So please take the invitation to pause or skip or fast forward on any episode, and to treat yourself gracefully and kindly after each time that you listen. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode. I'm so excited and honored to have our guest, Kari Cowell, on with us today. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a second, but one of the reasons I wanted to have her on here is because she is also an expert in trauma-informed care, and I just absolutely love all of the things that I have seen from her on the interwebs. So when we had the chance to do this podcast episode together, I was like, definitely need to have her on. So without further ado, Kari, can you tell us about yourself, please?
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Kari Cowell, and I'm a kinky ethical love coach. I work with people really to find freedom in love. And that is like the biggest piece of my work, because there are so many stories, so many narratives that we receive about love and romance and sex and about how it quote unquote should be. And it's so insidious that my work is really about freeing people from those narratives that in my opinion are actually very harmful to everybody, ourselves and the people that we're in relationship with, because our Western culture really does glorify these codependent relationships.
Yes.
And especially like my specialty, because I've been in this lifestyle for 22 years, but my specialty is working with people who are interested in or exploring ethical non-monogamy and kink, because there's so much love that's available to everyone in the world, and maybe not for everybody. That like it might not be romantic or sexual love for everybody, but if that's something you desire, I want you to be able to have that, and I want you to be able to feel free in exploring that and finding that for yourself. So that's a little bit about me. I have a puppy, so if you hear little puppy barks, he's freaking out.
I mean, it is what it is. People do not come onto my podcast for perfect audio quality. Like if you're here for that, you're probably going to want to exit now, right? So you actually have a doctoral education in clinical psychology, correct?
Correct. I technically didn't finish, because if you know anything about me, you know I hate red tape. So halfway through the doctoral program, I was like, oh, this is bullshit. Like, I can't do this. So I left. But yes, I do have a doctoral level education in clinical psychology.
That's awesome. Yeah, my sister, so I'm a doctorally prepared nurse, so is my sister. And we had the conversation at the end of our doctoral programs where it was just like, it feels like this is just a hazing ritual. Like you're proving yourself to people that you're willing to like go by the rules, which, you know, I'm also like you. I'm like, I will follow rules as long as they make sense. And most rules don't. So there's that.
Yeah. I felt the exact same way.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear your story because I already kind of know it, but I have the spoiler alert. But can you tell our listeners like your story of experiencing shame that kind of got you into all of this?
Yes. So I grew up with a really toxic mother, like emotionally abusive. I got kicked out of the house a lot. I mean, even now, like I just turned 39, but even like a few years ago, there was an incident where my brother basically stole my mom's entire retirement fund because she has Alzheimer's now. So like toxicity like throughout, it never really got healed. It never really got worked through because that was not like part of my family's dynamics. Like they were just not people who healed themselves. So I I don't really want to say that like I internalized this shame, but when I started dating, that's like the first question that people ask you, like, oh, are you like, what's your family like? Are you close to your family? And I suppose I did internalize it a little bit. I've just done like so much work that sometimes it's hard to be like, oh yeah, I did feel those things, you know? But like,
Yeah.
when you start talking, because I've always been like, my mom is very June Cleaver 50s, 1950s housewife, everything gets swept under the rug. And so like, my big thing when I was growing up was I'm going to be fully authentic, like fuck everybody. Like I'm just going to put myself out there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when I first started dating and like in my adult life, because, not that high school doesn't count, but like, it's just a different dynamic, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So when I got to college and I started dating people and they were asking me these questions and I just put it out there, there were looks and like people who literally said like, oh, well, I want someone who comes from a good family. And I'm like, well, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, I'm fine. I've started my healing journey. I'm not repeating the patterns that my family and my parents have put themselves into. But like, there's just this huge stigma. And not even in dating. I feel like dating always magnifies all of the stigmas. But like in life, you tell people like, I don't talk to my mom or I like essentially am estranged from my family. And you get these looks and you get the like, oh, well, but it's your family, it's your mom. And I'm like, yeah. And she's very toxic and she's not good for my mental health or well-being. And so like, there is a piece of shame around that because people just give you so much shit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really interesting because, I'm trying to think. So my parents are still married. My husband's parents are still married. And one of the things that I remember a lot when I was younger is like when somebody had parents that were divorced or somebody had a single mom, and especially in the neighborhood I grew up in, like that was something that now that I'm looking back just after what you said was stigmatized, right? Like you weren't coming from the perfect nuclear two-parent mom dad household, then that implied something about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of the implication was that really like, was that you're broken and there's something wrong with you, even though like you have like no control over whatever it is your parents decide to do.
Oh, yeah. That's so interesting. So like, what are some of the things that people would say? Like, would they literally say, oh, I want somebody who comes from a whole family? Like, what would they say?
There would just be people, and I'm not saying I got this a lot because it was mostly like the nonverbal communication of like the looks and like the or like, oh, maybe there wasn't a second date or whatever, but like it was almost like I always had to prove like, okay, my family's like a bunch of shitheads, but like I'm not, right? Like there was that extra like, okay, like this is where I came from, but this is not who I am, and like having to prove that. But like also, there's a lot of people out there who say, well, I want to be with someone who comes from a good family. I want to make sure that like my children have good grandparents or whatever, like it's this idea that like there's this value on like having a family, not even necessarily that is whole, like the nuclear, like the stereotypical nuclear family, but like a family that isn't toxic. Because I feel like now in 2021, like divorce is like less stigmatized.
Yeah.
But right, it's still, and I think we're shifting out of this, but like things take time. But it's still like, well, if there were mental health issues, or if you had an abusive parent, or if you had a parent in jail, like any of that type of stuff, like that's still like, oh, well, you're broken. There's something wrong with you. Like if I married you, or if I had kids with you, like what kind of situation am I getting myself into?
And I find that so interesting because, like, you know, knowing what I do from an educational background of, adverse childhood experience or ACE scores. So for those of you who haven't heard that term before, an ACE score is basically like how many traumas you had in your life growing up, how many adverse childhood events you had happen. And a lot of those are like parents in jail, parents with substance use disorders, parents with significant mental health issues. But what I find so interesting is like, if you know that you've had trauma in your background, the likelihood that like you're actually more likely to have done something about it, to have done some post-traumatic growth work, to have done some resiliency work like you, versus someone who's maybe in that family where a lot of things are swept under the rug, but like things aren't talked about, right? Or you think that your family was normal, you think that it was really healthy, and then you start to grow up later and you're like, wait a second, like other people's parents didn't do that, other things didn't happen here. So I actually think this is interesting because, like, a lot of the people that I know who have parents that, who ooze toxicity, right? Those people oftentimes are more self-aware of what has happened and have already done the work or are in the process of doing the work to make sure that they don't perpetuate it. So, like, oftentimes y'all are healthier than the people who didn't recognize that what they went through wasn't normal.
Yeah. And I think there's a big piece in there about, at least there was for me, but other people too, that I know of who have like toxic family situations. Like there's a piece in there where if you're in that situation and it's that bad, you really have to redefine everything for yourself, because there comes a point in your childhood where you're like, wait, like this isn't love, or wait, like this isn't normal. And it's very clear from a very early age that this is not normal, because you see what it's like, right, with your other friends who do come from like quote unquote normal families, that like, oh, you all sit down and eat dinner together and you don't yell at each other. Okay. Or like, oh, like your parents are actually really supportive of like what you're doing with your life or whatever that is. And so like for me, and even just like releasing, or maybe not even having like the shame and the guilt, or like being able to release the shame that people put on me, really came in like my being able to redefine like, well, what is family? Because my mom didn't take care of me, and my family unit was very like stereotypical nuclear. Dad was out working all the time, so like my dad and I were close, but like he was working all the time, so he wasn't around. And like, so my family was really like my friends who took me in whenever my mom kicked me out of the house, my friends that I could have like deep conversations with, and like, tell them all about like all of the crazy shit that my mom was going through, and like all of the crazy shit that my mom did to me. And like, people who really held me in that stuff, in that toxicity, and were there for me. And I was like, oh, this is family. My family was never, and I mean, I say blood family, but I'm also adopted. So like my family was never like my adopted family, my blood family, whatever. My family were the people who were my friends. And I had to redefine that at a very, very young age, because I didn't have what we normally think of as like familial support.
Yeah. Wow. So did you experience any shame around the adoption piece of like feeling other than, or because I've worked with people in the past who some say no, like absolutely not. I felt like I was a member, like that was a thing. And then I've worked with other people who have said, yeah, there was a lot of like feeling like I kind of belonged, but didn't. So like, how did that, what was that experience like for you?
I feel like because there's so much intersectionality with the toxicity, it's really hard to say, because like, no, do I feel like being adopted, like, was I othered because I was adopted? I don't really feel like I was. And right, like adoption in and of itself is trauma, because you are taken away from the person that you like share skin cells with, right? That you share DNA with. And especially because I was I'm an international adoptee from Taiwan. Like there was a period of time where, at least as far as I know in my story, where I was not with my adopted family and I was not with my mom, like my birth mom. I was with an adoption agent who happened to be in Taiwan. And so like there is a trauma there, like whether we're aware of that, like on a conscious level or not. But I feel like in my family unit, I wasn't othered, but I was also like an Asian American person growing up. I grew up in Wisconsin. So like there is a different sort of othering, but there's so many levels of intersection there that it's not about not belonging because I was adopted. It's just about not belonging in general. So
yeah. There's a book, and I'm gonna forget the author's name, but it's called Raceless. And it's the story of a biracial woman who her mother had an affair with, like a one-night stand with a Black man. And then like her whole life she's told like that her dad is her dad, her biological father. And it's about her like realizing that that's what happened. But she described like but she lives in a very white neighborhood. And so she kind of describes the moment of like kind of waking up and going outside and going, oh, hold on a second. Like I'm different from everybody else. Like I've been calling myself white for my whole life. And like, that's not true. And also like, I felt like I was a member of the community from a racial standpoint until this moment. Like, did you ever have because I've had that moment as a multiracial person of like, oh, wait a second. I am different than everybody else here. Like, do you remember when that happened for you?
Oh, totally. I had the same experience where I'm like, oh, I'm white, basically. Like I'm obviously not on the outside. I'm very brown, but inside I was like, no, I'm white. I fit in here. Like, and I feel like, and I don't know where exactly you're at in, Ohio, but like, at least where I grew up in Wisconsin, there really was no diversity. There was like me, one of my really good friends, and then like a whole family of Hmong children. There were like 7 children in that family, but that was it. But we all like kind of were in this, like we were all very accepted, right? I think I maybe heard like racial slurs like twice in my entire childhood growing up. And so like living in that bubble, I was like, no, I'm white, like I fit in, I belong here. Nobody really mentioned that, right? It wasn't differing. And then I went to college, and I went to college in Los Angeles. I went to University of Southern California for my undergrad. There's a lot of Asian people in Los Angeles. And I look around and I'm like, first, I'm like, oh my God, I've never been around this many Asian people before. And then I was like, oh, but I don't fit in here either. So it was like this weird, like kind of in between, like I'm not Asian, but I'm not white. And I kind of like, don't fit into either of these groups. And it really wasn't until, I mean, recently, like honestly, like the last year or two, maybe 5, where I started claiming, well, it's been like 5 or 6 years since I started claiming like Asian American as something more than like what I am outside.
Yeah.
And really like within the past year or two where I've really felt like that's embodied, because we're sold this story of like Asian Americans and really like any minority being a monolith, that you like, if you are Asian American, this is your story. And this is the only story that counts. Right. And so I've had to do a lot of unpacking around like, no, like I am Asian American because I'm Asian American, not because I, have immigrant parents or like grew up in a certain area or speak, it would be Mandarin in my case. I don't speak Mandarin, but like with my heritage, that's the language that I would be speaking. That's not what makes an Asian American. So like I had to do a lot of unpacking around that.
I'm like resonating so deeply with this because I think you and I might be on the same timelines in terms of like, I like coming to terms with and really identifying and embodying what it means to be, our respective cultural, ethnic backgrounds, because same. And I love that. I mean, I don't love that it happened for you, but I love your ability to be able to like describe that in between place, or that other place of, okay, over here I'm othered, and also over here I'm othered, because that's a really, really common experience for biracial people. And also I think it's important to like point out that that also happens for people who are of one race or ethnicity that grow up in an area where that race or ethnicity is like very, very rarely represented. So like, I guess my next question would be, you've got, and this is also why I love doing these episodes, is because it's so interesting where like shame and what we've been talking about with the othering, like recognizing, oh, my life is different, or I'm different, how that sneaks in everywhere. What steps did you take, both on this journey of reclaiming what it means for you to be an Asian American, and also, claiming what it means for you to be a whole healed human when it comes to dating?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, like, I don't necessarily believe in the concept of being like a whole healed human.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Because there's always work to do, right? And this is like, I talk with my clients a lot about this too, because we are basically like onions, right? And there's always like, we'll reach a point in our healing where we're like, okay, cool, like I've got this, right? Like for me, it would be mother wounds. Like, okay, cool, I've got this, like we're good, like I've healed this thing. And then something will come along to like really re-trigger that mother wound, and it will appear the same, right, in like our behavior, but it's not the same. It's just a deeper level, because these things affect us in some way. And I'm not saying this has to be like a big dramatic way. I find the more that I heal myself, the more subtle it gets. And then you really have to like get in there with like the fine tooth comb and be like, oh shit, like, okay, this is the mother wound, right? But it affects us for our entire lives. It's just like, how much does it affect, right? Because I feel like when I was like 17, which is when I left my house and went to college, like left my family and went to college, like when I was 17 and dating versus when I'm 39 and dating, it's a vastly different experience. But honestly, like I couldn't have done any of this without lots and lots and lots of support. Like I've been in therapy. I've been in therapy since I was 9, which is a great story, which we can come back to. But I've been in therapy on and off since I was 9 years old. There was a piece of me, and I almost attribute this to being in therapy so young, but I've always had this drive to like better myself, because I knew like what my parents had wasn't love. The way my mom specifically treated me wasn't love. So I've always been on this quest to find like, well, what is love? What does this mean? What does this look like? How do we show it? Like, how can we love better? How can we love with more empathy and compassion? So lots of books, lots of reading, lots of education, obviously like all of my degrees, and a big deep dive into the wellness world. So like I'm certified and I have taught yoga for a very long time. So I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a Reiki master. I just dabble in like all of these wellness things. I read tarot, crystal healing, like all of this stuff. But more than anything, what has helped with my healing, and I love to talk about this with my clients as well, it was really just being in community with people who accept me for who I am. Because heal yourself, right? Like it starts with you, but you have to heal in community. We're always in relation. We're relational creatures. So like being in communities with people who just supported who I was and accepted me for all that I was and everything that has made me me has just been like most healing thing.
That's so beautiful. And, like that is the cornerstone of anti-shame work, of like healing from trauma, is finding places where you feel safe, being fully and authentically expressed, where people aren't going to judge you, where they're not going to make you feel wrong. And I also just love your embodiment of so often the things that cause past pain, like the things in our past that cause pain, are the things that like really drive us as we get older, so often to like make the world a better place and to help other people not experience that pain. So I love that that your focus now is like this is ethical love, is ethical dating and non-monogamy and kink and BDSM, because it's like you're getting to give people the thing that like you found for yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny because I look back at everything and I'm like, no, this is exactly what I'm like, the work I'm supposed to be doing in the world. Because even just hearing you speak and reflecting back some things, I was like, oh, but it started. And I don't believe that people need to love themselves to be loved. I think that's a bullshit concept and very toxic for people. But like, really, like, I think about like, where did I find this community? Because we can find communities with people who share our experiences, right? But that's not where I found that. I really found that. And I think it was because through, whether it was through the therapy I went to when I was really young or through just like me thinking about things and about my family, like I accepted myself. I accepted where I was. I accepted who my family was. And I think that really helped draw in the people that I needed, right? Like at like 13, 14, 15 to take care of me because I was so open about like, no, my family's like complete shit. I got kicked out of the house again. Can I come over? Right. That like nobody was like, oh no, like you're, like you're this dirty, shameful secret. It wasn't a dirty, shameful secret for me. And so like nobody treated me like that. And everybody was so kind and opening and welcoming. And I think a lot of that really did have to do with like me being able to sit with myself and sit with my pain and sit with my, the things that we're told we should be ashamed of. Because even if we don't get it from like the people in society or people in our lives, we get it from media,
Oh
like,
my gosh.
I was an 80s, 90s child. Like you look at that, it's all nuclear families, like Malcolm in the Middle and like Family Matters and everybody's funny and everybody has like the best parents. And like you see that. And if that's what you have modeled for you, and then you're in here where you're like, your mom's telling you're a piece of shit and you get kicked out of the house for no good fucking reason. You're like, well, fuck. There has to be something wrong with me. And it's so easy to internalize that.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of that, which I think is like, it deserves to be said again, is the whole idea that you have to love yourself first in order to be able to be loved. That is so profound, like so simple, but so profound. And you're right. I think that we look for love externally a lot of times when we don't have it internally. And I know that for myself, when I made it more important to get love from other people than from myself, that was a problem, right? And there have been plenty of times where, especially like in with my husband, whom I've been with for 17 years, there's a moment where I'm struggling to love myself, and his ability and his willingness to love me in that moment is the thing that helps me love myself again. Right. And so I think that's so powerful what you say. And it is nuanced because like so often in our society, we don't love ourselves and just completely look for love externally and can get into some really codependent, toxic places with other people. But this whole idea that like, I can come to you and feel ashamed or be struggling to show up vulnerably because I'm struggling to accept myself the way I am. And for someone else to meet me in that spot and then like help me see that it's okay for me to love myself, like that's powerful as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's exactly what you said, right? It's always acceptance that you can't accept yourself right now, right? Acceptance that like people maybe won't accept you or they will accept you, right? But I also think it's like looking at, right? Because we need both. It's looking at like, have I done everything that I can do for myself? Because I can meditate all day long. And if I'm feeling shitty about myself and beating myself up still, if I'm not meditating, like it's not going to help. So have I done all of the things that I can do? Like, have I done my mindset work? Have I meditated? Have I, maybe gotten into my body, like gone for a run or done yoga or whatever? Have I done everything that I can do for myself to help move this energy? And if that answer is yes, and I still feel like shit, it's like, okay, then I need to go out and get it from somebody else, because we do need that. Like, we need positive affirmations from other people. We need touch from other people. We need reassurance from other people, because that is part of who we are as human beings. We're relational creatures.
Oh, that's like landing so much for me because, and I know you know her, Jen Underwood. She's the emotional dominatrix. She's a fabulous trauma-informed coach. She taught me something personally about, you know, like one of my biggest core wounds, which is the disappointment wound. Like the thing that hurts me the most is when I feel like I am a disappointment, right? When it's in my character that I'm going to disappoint people. And so one of the things that she taught me was how to ask externally from my loved ones for like confirmation that I wasn't disappointing them in that moment, or I wasn't a disappointment. And it's a really gorgeous thing because it's me actually like advocating for myself. It's something I can do for myself. And I'm going to somebody that I feel comfortable being vulnerable with. I feel comfortable like bearing myself to, and asking for that like confirmation of, can you just remind me of this thing? I need to hear it in an external voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the most healing things that happened for me as I worked on that wound for myself, was to be able to say, hey, like, I know this sounds dumb, but can you just tell me that I'm not you don't feel like I'm a disappointment right now? And my husband's like, yeah, of course not. Like, you're not a disappointment. I've never felt that way before. And I'm like, okay, great. Thanks. And I go back on my merry way and do the things. But like, that can be really helpful to have someone externally who understands like where your shame is, or understands where your trauma is, to be able to support you in those moments when you're like, hey, like you said, I've done everything I can do for myself. And now I need a little bit of I need a little help.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay. It's okay to ask for that help. And I feel like if I had not done that when I was when I was a teen, basically, like, I would not be anywhere near the place that I was now, because who the fuck knows, right? Like, I grew up in rural Wisconsin. Like, there's nowhere for me to go if I'm not going to somebody's place. So like, who knows? But like, yeah. And it was all done in community, because I did have those people who could say like, I don't understand why your mom treats you this way. Like, you're great, you know?
So helpful. So helpful. And so like, well, first of all, actually, I have another question. I want to go in a slightly different direction before I ask this last question, because I think that this is something that is inherently not talked about, although getting better. I feel like we're having more conversations out in the open around it. But like, tell me about how your coaching around ethical non-monogamy and kink BDSM is like related to everything we've talked about today. Like, how did that piece come in for you?
I've been ethically non-monogamous since I was like 17, 20-ish years old. So like, I've been ethically non-monogamous, I would say, since I was like 17, 18, but I didn't really have the vocabulary for it until I was like 20, 21. I just kind of was like, I'm going to do this thing. And then I learned that there were words for it, right? So yeah, but it really, like, honestly, it came about, my journey with ethical non-monogamy and kink came about because it was really like my natural proclivity is. I always like sexually was like, I want to be tied up. Like, please, like, tell me what to do. You know, like all of this stuff. Like, I was really into power dynamics and like being bound. And I think some of it for me was like a sense, like, I'm a really highly sensitive person. So I think some of it was like a sensory thing, because it made me feel safe and held. But like with ethical non-monogamy, that came about because like I had this high school sweetheart. I ran around with all boys. I have a lot of directive energy in my being just naturally. So I ran around with all boys when I was a kid. And my high school sweetheart was one of my friends, but then like I cheated on him with one of our other friends, like one of our mutual friends. And then like we healed that and was like, let's just make this work. And then I moved away to Los Angeles for college. And like, I'm 17 in a new place with a lot of new people. And so like I cheated on him again. And I was like, man, and I've always had like this very strong base of ethics. Like, I wanted to make sure that everyone was taken care of, you know, as much as they could be taken care of all the time. Some of that's probably also codependency, right? But I wanted to make sure everyone felt cared for. And so like I was like, this is not working. Like whatever this is not working. I can't like keep cheating on somebody, but I still
Yeah.
loved this person. And so that was a journey of like, oh, there's this thing called open relationships. So like the next, relationship I'm in, I'm going to do an open relationship and see how that works. And like, it was really all of this experimentation around what feels good and natural for me. And at the end of the day, because like this is one of my like base core values, it all has to do with freedom, whether that's the freedom to love who I love in the way that I want to love them, the freedom to label myself however I want to label myself, the freedom to, just live my life however I want to live my life. And that's where this all comes in my work, in my coaching with the people that I work with, because it's less about the labels, and more about the freedom.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. And you know what I think is so interesting is, so from like what I've learned and experienced from BDSM, it's when I hear about people who say that like they love freedom and then also love being tied up, I think people get like really confused by that. They're like, wait a second, like you're telling me that you want freedom. And then you're also telling me that like you like to be in experiences where you literally can't get free. And I think that there's such a lack of, again, talking about this so that people can understand it. But like, as somebody who also really, I love pressure, right? Like one of my favorite things when I'm feeling dysregulated from a nervous system perspective is like a weighted blanket, or my husband who's like really strong, having him like wrap his arms and his legs around me and just like squeeze as tight as he can, right? And so that actually like grounds the nervous system and allows you to feel more in control and more free. And so it's such it's like, when you look at it surface level, I think they look like opposites. But when you really start to get into some of the actual practices, like they do really create some good feelings and freedom in them.
Oh, absolutely. I actually love, I really love bondage, rope bondage specifically. It's called shibari. Shibari is the art. Sometimes I just do rope bondage, which is less artful and just tying things up. But like, because shibari is very pretty, but sometimes my knots are not. But it's really, I'll do it like even just like washing my dishes, or like if I have to hop on a coaching call, because there are some times where like, I have CPTSD from everything that has happened in my life. And like, so I'll feel dysregulated, or like, I have some chronic health issues that like cause me just like random internal pain, and like having that pressure of being tied up in rope, like really helps alleviate that. It helps ground me. It helps like give me this sense of safety. It's like the same thing. My husband is literally twice my size. And I'm like, can you just lay on me? Because like, you're like, you're right. Like there's, it's like, so having a lot of directive energy naturally in my outside life, I actually love being submissive in the bedroom, but that's because it's controlled loss of control. It's like, this is a container where I can lose control, where I know I'm with somebody safe, where I don't have to like think about anything. Whereas like if I went out and did that in my real life, like I would freak the fuck out. So like, they're not separate. It's just that our brains as humans want to black and white everything, right? And even in like our patriarchal society, right? Because that's part of it too, is like the black and white of everything. You have to be in this container, but no, like we're complex and we're nuanced, and it's just part of the human condition. And I fully believe that like all of the things that may seem opposite are really, really aligned and like connected, even though they might not seem connected from the outside.
Yeah. And I also just love that you're like, again, you're bringing this to a public conversation, because there are so many more people. I cannot tell you how many clients I have that, I used to focus in business coaching, and I would laugh because my clients would come to me for business coaching, and I would say that about 80% of the time maybe even 90% of the time, we didn't talk about business. We talked about all of these other things. And one of the things that many clients discovered along our journey as we would be working together is they were so, like you said, directive, dominant outside in their professional lives that they didn't have a place where they could feel like they could really release and let other people be in control. And when they would explore that whole idea of submission, whether it was in the bedroom or just, around the house with their partners, there was this just this almost, as they described it, like a sigh, right? Like this internal release of pressure, of tension, to just be like, wow, okay, like I can relax for a minute. And the, like you said, the bondage piece as well, I think comes into that. And so I think it's beautiful that you're actively having the conversation publicly, because I think a lot of people would benefit from exploring these things and really seeing that they're not things that have to be hidden in the shadows, right? They're not things that we have to feel shameful about. These are things that if we were able to peer into the bedrooms or the homes of, average people, these things are happening way more often than we're talking about in real life.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of things, especially in like the BDSM kink world, can be so healing, like on a very spiritual level. I'm not saying, let me caveat this with, I'm not saying like use BDSM and kink as like your main healing tool, because then that just gets dangerous and that's not what it's for. But
absolutely,
I find that it can be just so healing. Like even so, I sometimes dom. I'm mostly a sub, but like I have a friend that I dom, and we had talked about, especially with like, the past year and all of the like racial tensions and murders and everything that have happened. Like we talked about, he's a white dude, cishet white male. And we talked about like having a scene where I get to just like totally rip into him about like being a cishet white dude. And I'm like, how healing is this, right? On like a very spiritual level for a woman who is melanated, right? Like, but it's in this container that says like, hey, this is safe. And like the biggest thing about like BDSM for me is the aftercare, and hopefully for everybody, because you come back to, no, you're still a good person. Like, yes, I just spent like the last 20, 40, 60 minutes like yelling at you and telling you you're a piece of shit. And then we come back to, you're a good person. I love you. This was just play. You heal in play. That was part of my doctoral degree, was play therapy, because I wanted to work with kids. Oh my gosh. And that's how we heal, because adults we're really running around as like wounded children, honestly. Yeah.
Like, and I'm just having the thought of like, can you imagine if, your elders or like generational ancestors or other people who've maybe had toxic parenting, like, can you imagine if your parents had a space to do that? Like what that could have done?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm in love with this. I think that this is it's so beautiful, and it's so permission giving. And it's, again, like it's the healing of lineages of trauma by helping yourself internally come to a space where you feel grounded, where you feel regulated, where you feel like able to love yourself, able to accept yourself.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think really finding ways to bridge the gap between like, whether that's like BDSM or kink or therapy or whatever, bridging those gaps into, oh, right, this also, like these things, these tools, these tenets, these guidelines can also be brought into my everyday life.
Yes. Yes. Like if you can experience safety around admitting your deepest, darkest desires, right? The things that like you feel uncomfortable sharing with the outside world. If you can experience safety, asking for what you want, asking for what you desire, if you can experience love and acceptance in those spaces, it does make it a lot easier to then go out to the outside world and feel safe.
Yes. Yes. We just have to get that transitional piece in there, because I think sometimes it can be hard for our brains to kind of make that switch. And honestly, like that's like one of my biggest zones of genius is making the switch into, okay, you do this thing in like the dungeon or you do this thing in your bedroom, but let's see how this applies to your outside life. I mean, I wrote a book on it. It's called Dom Yourself to Better Dates, because like, if we're talking about like power exchange or like power struggle, like we have that inside of ourselves all the time. And we have that when we go on dates because we've been taught, and I'm talking more on like a heterosexual level. But I think this appears on like all levels. I just don't know to like what degree, but like heterosexual relationships are very combative. It's very much a power struggle, especially in like 2021, if you're a woman.
Oh, yeah.
And you've also been taught like feminism and independence and like all of this stuff, right? So there's all of these like power struggles happening, not like both within us and with the people that we're going on dates in. And you have to kind of rein that in and be like, you have to dom yourself into being like, okay, these are my boundaries. This is how I'm keeping myself safe. This is how I'm controlling the situation. And also, this is where I get to lean back and let somebody else take control.
Oh, I just got chills. I love that so much. Also, I didn't know you wrote that, so I'm definitely going to go check that out. And we can drop the link to the book in the show notes so that people can go find it. Okay, so I could keep talking to you forever, but to like make sure that our listeners don't have to be on here forever. What's one piece of advice that you would give somebody who's listened to this who maybe grew up in a similar situation to you did, and who maybe hasn't figured out how to move forward in a like restorative way?
I feel like there's so many things that I could say, but I think I'm going to give two pieces. One is acceptance of everything that you've been through, everything that you are, everything that you're feeling, because whatever it is you're feeling is totally okay. And acceptance that bits and pieces of that might be present like forever. And that's also okay. Like, I sometimes feel I was way more like, maybe balanced isn't the right word. I don't know what the word is, but I feel like I was much more mature maybe when I was 16, because when I was 16, I was running around saying, my mom's not the best mom, but she's doing the best she can. And I still believe that's true. But the more healing that I do, the more angry I get. And the more angry I get, the more I realize how much she hurt me. And so like, it's this like multifaceted ball, like this geodesic dome of like, well, some days, yeah, I'm going to be okay. And I'm going to be like, you know what? I do love my mom and she tried the best she could. And, you know, another day, like I might be, well, like, fuck you. Like, I can't believe you did this to me, and all of that's okay. And just the acceptance of that. And that I think on some level is always going to be there. Like the intensity might be lower, but it's still going to be there. And then I think too, like, getting yourself into community with people who also accept you. So it's really all just acceptance of everything, but getting yourself with a good group of people who see you as you are and see your magic and see your amazingness, and also see like you're human and you have these things and can accept you and accept your past and accept everything that you are. Those are like the two biggest things that were helpful for me, and hopefully are going to be helpful for somebody else who has gone through something similar.
Yeah. You've given me chills through multiple times through this episode, but that's gorgeous. I love that you rebelled and did two pieces of advice, because they were both amazing. And it sounds like you've got a really beautiful space for people if that's what they're looking for. Hopefully by now, if you've been listening, you know that this gets to be a space that that you can feel that way, and in my group as well. And there's lots of, amazingly, there's lots of other coaches and people out there that are starting to do this work and create like safe, supportive spaces for people. So just know, if you haven't found one yet, you can reach out to Kari, you can reach out to me. And if our spaces aren't the right ones for you, we probably know of a space that is the right one for you. So Kari, thank you so much for joining me. This has been incredible. I am very just grateful that you were able to join me.
Thank you, Lee. It's been my pleasure.
All right, everyone, we will see you next week. Thank y'all so much for taking time out of your busy day to listen to our episode. If it resonated with you, we'd absolutely love it if you'd give us a rating in the App Store or if you'd share the episode with a friend or two. And if you're looking for even more resources, community, and education around what it means to be trauma-informed and to live a psychologically safe life, we would absolutely love to have you join us in our free Facebook community, Becoming Trauma Informed. You can find the information in the show notes, and we're so excited to welcome you into our community.